Riften, the capital of the Rift, a region bordering both Morrowind and Cyrodiil in the southeast of Skyrim, characterised by aspen forests boxed in by mountains, a beautiful hold it most certainly is. However, its central hub is a different beast, made infamous, not for its quality of mead, not for its fishing trade nor its market, but rather because of its both figurative and literal underground. Beneath the city itself is a network of sewage tunnels known as the Ratway. It's home to skeevers and unsavoury characters alike, but its best known residents are something a bit more. Something arguably greater, at least historically, than your ordinary disorganised band of criminals. For down here one can locate the headquarters of the notorious Thieves Guild, who operate out of a crudely established tavern known as the Ragged Flagon, where one can wash down a refreshing bottle of mead with some nice, sweet sewage water, and interact with the rudimentary inn's lovely patrons and staff.
I'll smash in your skull.
But you get the idea, this isn't the place you go to if you can at all avoid it, unless for instance you have stolen goods to pawn, or are indeed a member of the guild yourself. Nonetheless, it's down here in this literal shithole that we can encounter the mystery I intend to focus this video on. A character whose name is very curious, whose backstory is interesting, and his true identity is unknown, even to himself. So join me as I try my hand at exploring yet another fairly popular Skyrim mystery. Who is Rune? So to begin our investigation, so to speak, we need to do the obvious, and that is, of course, to join the Thieves Guild. Doing so is fairly straightforward, and you'll likely get the ball rolling during the main quest, and considering this is a 13-year-old massively popular game, you probably don't need me recounting it play for play. But this introductory quest sees you make your way down to the Ragged Flagon, and it's from there, as part of our initiation, we're given the quest Taking Care of Business, where we must bully 3 of Riften's business owners into submission in order to retrieve some debt money. Returning to Brynjolf will begin the quest Loud and Clear, in which we're formally inducted into the guild courtesy of an arsehole named Mercer Frey, given a new assignment, but most importantly granted access to the Ragged Flagon cistern, where we can meet a bunch of random characters we'll never need to interact with in order to complete the Thieves Guild questline, who can be seen training down here for what I can only assume is nothing in particular, in between bouts of passingly interacting and standing vacant, and one such inconsequential character in the grand scheme of things is Rune, who I can only assume is training to battle his demons as he's swinging his blade nowhere near any of the dummies that have been laid out. Look, I'm sure he's doing his best. To start, we will be unable to open a conversation with Rune, only interact with him in passing, to which he says the following.
Name's Rune. Yeah, Rune, just like you're thinking. Have no idea what my birth name really is, and frankly I don't care. Being brought up by a poor family, I had to learn how to steal if I wanted to make ends meet. Brynjolf actually caught me trying to pick his pocket in the market. If he was anyone else, I would have gotten away with it. I'm glad Brynjolf decided to let me join. Been trying to make some coin for him ever since.
And from that we gather absolutely nothing, we just know that his name is Rune, and that is noteworthy due to how unusual it is, and that he joined the guild after attempting, and failing, to pickpocket Brynjolf. Aside from that, we learn that Rune is not his birth name, and that he doesn't actually know what his birth name was. However, for the time being he states that he doesn't care, so many players would likely dismiss this dialogue as, oh that's interesting, and sort of move on. After all, Rune isn't hugely important to very much. However, upon a later return to the Ragged Flagon cistern, or in my case, literally 5 minutes later, Rune becomes complimenting of your thieving skills regardless of whether or not you've demonstrated them, and actually allows you to engage him in conversation.
I've never seen anyone with skills like yours. I just wanted to let you know that if you need anything, you can talk to me.
It's unclear which skills he's referring to. Perhaps it's our ability to strike a dummy without missing, or indeed swing our weapon within the same postcode of the dummy. Anyway, Rune, how did you get your unusual name?
My father told me he found me as a young boy in the wreckage of a ship that sank off of the coast near Solitude. All he found in my pocket was a tiny smooth stone inscribed with some sort of strange runes.
Do you know what they mean?
No one does. I've even taken the damn thing to the College of Winterhold. I must have spent every last coin I've made with the guild trying to find out what it means.
Maybe you aren't meant to know.
Perhaps. They could be nonsense, inane scribbles done by someone in idle boredom. But if not, if they actually mean something, they might tell me where I'm from, what ship I was on, everything.
So who gave you the name?
Actually, the fisherman who found me, the man I call my father, gave it to me. Thought it was fitting, I suppose. I never changed it because it never felt right to do so.
Righto, I'll keep an eye out for anything.
I appreciate that.
And that right there is the sum of the conversation we get to have with the guy. Unlike before, where he claimed he didn't care what his true name was, which may very well be true in a way, he confirmed to us this time that he is actively trying to seek out any information about his past prior to his adoption. So we've offered to keep our eyes peeled in case we find anything, though there really isn't an awful lot to go off. We know he was adopted by a fisherman after being found aboard a shipwreck as a young boy, and that shipwreck was near Solitude. The only clue to his past identity was a rune stone found in his pocket, hence his new father called him Rune. It would seem he kept the thing into adulthood, seeking to find out what it meant, only to hit brick wall after brick wall. Even the highly intelligent mages of the College of Winterhold, who usually have a knack for this sort of thing among their ranks, couldn't identify it. And any attempts to find out where he came from and who his parents actually were appears to have come up fruitless for him, which is, to say the very least, fascinating. It's as if, according to how he tells his story, he just materialised out of thin air one day. But that cannot possibly be the case, can it? Well, fortunately, we aren't the only ones perplexed by Rune's backstory. Well, on a cupboard in the Ragged Flagon cistern, we can find a letter titled, "No Word Yet." It's addressed to Rune and reads as follows. Rune, I've used every source at my disposal, and I still can't find a trace of your parents. Whoever they are, they've completely erased themselves from history. This is quite a feat considering the quality of my sources. If I come up with anything else, I'll be certain to contact you. Athel Newbury. Presumably this Athel Newbury is an investigator into these kinds of things, or at least proficient in the process of doing so. He claims he has many sources of high quality, and yet none of them can track down even a drop of information about Rune's parents. So if he can't find anything, chances are good there's nothing to find, which might be arguably a finding within itself. It's also worth noting there's nothing really for us to do. We can tell Rune will keep our eyes peeled in case we find anything, but that doesn't give us as much as a miscellaneous quest, and so there's really nothing for us to follow. It appears any quest pertaining to getting to the bottom of Rune's true identity, or at least his true origins, hit the cutting room floor during the development of the game. Although in the spirit of trying, Rune claims he was found on the wreckage of a ship that went down somewhere nearby to the city of Solitude. His choice of words being sank may very well suggest the ship is now sitting at the bottom of the Sea of Ghosts somewhere, but that may very well be a poor usage of the word sank. After all, he was rescued from the wreckage, by a humble fisherman no less. If the vessel is now fully submerged in the water, then the fisherman must have gotten there early, in which case surely there'd have been other survivors than just one child. But there are variables. Perhaps portions of the vessel didn't sink and Rune just happened to be lucky enough to be on one of them, and a fisherman found him in time. However, just maybe the ship Rune was found aboard can be found in the open world of Skyrim. There are various shipwrecks found along the province's sole north coast, most of which appear to have fully or partially run aground. Most don't really qualify on account of their proximity, and even when they can be considered remotely close to Solitude, they're usually more local to an equally as notable location. And so, with consideration for using the description nearby to Solitude as helpful direction, that leaves us with only one real viable possibility. The wreckage of a vessel situated to the northwest of Solitude named Orphan's Tear. I'm not sure what this guy is doing out here dipping his feet in the freezing cold waters, but forget about him. I think it's fair to say the wreckage of the Orphans Tier, though beached, is also sunken, split in two around the centre and now home to a couple of bandits, whom we shall now make short work of. Nevertheless, the vessel has certainly seen better days and has likely been here for a while, if bandits are now utilising it as a campsite. But aside from being a hotspot for finding Nordic barnacle clusters, there's nothing really to find aboard the Orphans Tier that would actually imply it has much of anything to do with Rune at all. It is simply the most viable candidate out of the shipwrecks we can find, based on the fact that it's the only one that is in the correct general area, at least as far as gameplay exploration is concerned, but that doesn't necessarily mean that in canon this is the vessel that Rune was found aboard. If we revert to Rune's wording, he claims the ship he was aboard sank, and though this one certainly is not floating, Rune also stated it was off the coast, as in further out to sea, and the Orphans Tier very much so appears to have run aground in shallow waters along Skyrim's coastline. But I also think that relying on Rune's wording assumes that he was in a position to remember himself. I think it's more likely this recounting of what happened came from the fisherman who adopted him. That's not to say he would have a reason to be untruthful, but details tend to get messy if not lost in oral history. I guess what I'm trying to say is Rune just as easily could have been aboard the Orphans Tier as aboard a different vessel. But this entire train of thought relies on the least important part of the mystery surrounding Rune. But in the event that aiding Rune discover his identity was initially intended to be something that we could actually do in Skyrim that just happened to get cut, it would make sense if it pertained to an actual physical location within the game. This doesn't exclude the idea that a location could be cut just as easily as a quest. In fact, there are various locations in Skyrim that were cut for the final release of the game. But the name Orphans Tier is awfully fitting. Now, were this a child found on a shipwreck alone in the real world, the name of that vessel probably would be a lot more random, but in the realms of storytelling, it usually isn't. Simply put, to give something like a ship a name is for it to tell a story within itself. And well, Rune certainly fit the description of an orphan at the time of his discovery, and diving into the waters of his unknown past is not to come without its painful moments. In other words, the only solid connection I can think of between Rune and the Orphans Tier is relegated to thematic metabolics, which may indeed be valid to acknowledge from an external perspective, but simply put, there's no explicit evidence directing Rune's story towards any individual shipwreck found in Skyrim. But it isn't mightily important, so let's turn our eyes to the other details. Firstly, Rune is an Imperial. Imperials are native to the province of Cyrodiil, the heart of the Empire to the south of Skyrim. And while simply being an Imperial doesn't necessarily mean Rune hails personally from Cyrodiil, it is worth noting that ship or no ship, he arrived in Skyrim by sea when he was a young boy, so the odds are good he wasn't born in Skyrim. Cyrodiil may seem the most likely answer to the question of where Rune was born based on statistics, but that isn't actual evidence, and due to the Imperial's culture being rooted in cosmopolitanism, I'm sure there are countless who live and or were born in other provinces. But if so, why would Rune be on a ship circumnavigating the entirety of Tamriel to reach the north of a province with which Cyrodiil shares a border? Perhaps it was the safest form of travel. And no, the irony of that statement is not lost on me. But considering the roads are littered with bandits and wild animals and the like, it would make sense to transit with a child by sea. Nevertheless, it's a redundant point because we don't actually know where Rune was travelling from, or if indeed he was accompanied by his true parents on his journey. The game appears to be going out of its way to ensure there is nothing to discern about him, so instead of wildly theorising about things we couldn't possibly know for the time being, let's turn our attention to Rune's own avenues of investigation. It's worth noting that Rune's wording implies he wasn't an infant when he was rescued by the fisherman as a child, and yet he fails to remember anything prior to that, including his own true name. And the only clue he has is a stone inscribed with strange runes that was found along with him. And nobody seems to know what the runes on this object actually mean, not even the mages of the College of Winterhold. He does suggest he's still in possession of the stone, however, it's not in his inventory, he just has a bunch of arrows apparently. Either way, his dialogue implies the College of Winterhold didn't have as much as a theory regarding what the runes on the stone could mean. As for the letter from Athel Newbury, I do not think Athel Newbury is an unseen member of the College of Winterhold, simply because he isn't actually pondering over the stone in question, but rather attempting to track down Rune's real parents. It's unclear what information he has to work with, but he concludes that whoever they are, they've erased themselves from history, which is a fascinating choice of words that we'll come to in a moment. But first, let's focus on this unseen Athel Newbury character. It would seem he's a private investigator, at least that's how he's functioning for Rune. However, what else can we discern about him? For starters, the name Athel appears with one other character in the Elder Scrolls franchise, that being Athel Bileborn, a Breton in the Elder Scrolls Online. Perhaps this means Athel Newbury is also a Breton, so potentially Rune's investigations have taken him as far as High Rock. And so it's clear he's exhausting many avenues of investigation and getting absolutely nowhere. And as he himself says, he must have sunk every single coin he's made with the guild into this. But fortunately, we have the benefit of not actually occupying the Elder Scrolls universe, so we can look at things from a broader perspective. So let's turn our focus to the stone with the strange runes on it that we can't see, which doesn't help, admittedly. Now, small rune stones appear to be a thing from the Elder Scrolls Online. They can be used to craft glyphs, which in turn can be used to enchant weapons, armour and jewellery. They exist chiefly as a mechanic, and though they bear a rune each, they're not absolutely covered in the things like the stone rune claims to have. The Elder Scrolls Online also has material that makes the existence of runestones technically canon, and that is the Enigma of the Runestones by Talenga the Artificer. But if anything, wouldn't this mean members of the College of Winterhold would be able to identify such a runestone if indeed the stone in Rune's possession happened to be one? However mysterious they may still be portrayed as, you'd think the knowledge of their very existence would make them identifiable, especially to a scholarly mage. So I'm having a hard time rationalising this as being what Rune is dealing with. But I'm not going to discount it completely, as it's clear there's a lot that isn't known about the runestones in the Elder Scrolls Online. However, I do suspect the stone in Rune's possession has a meaning, and this explanation provides it with none. In Skyrim's context, runes are a form of spell that functions a bit like a trap. A stationary spell cast on a surface with a destructive property that activates when somebody gets too close or stands on it, like some kind of wizard's response to landmines. I also doubt this to be the correct train of thought. But regardless, the nature of the stone is impossible to determine because we can't see it. And judging by what we know about it, we probably wouldn't be in an advantageous position even if we could, meaning we're no closer to unshackling ourselves from the limitations that come with having absolutely no information. However, with regards to the world of the Elder Scrolls, and perhaps specifically the Thieves Guild, that may be workable information within itself. There is a popular theory regarding the mystery that is Rune's backstory, that hinges heavily on the particular wording of Athel Newbury's letter, when taking into consideration the faction to which Rune is aligned. I am of course talking about the suggestion that Rune's parents, whoever they may be, have completely erased themselves from history. Now, in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, the Thieves Guild storyline sees you meet a fellow named simply the Grey Fox, who is perceived by the outside world of Tamriel to be a lone, mysterious master thief, notorious for leading the Thieves Guild in Cyrodiil for 3 centuries. However, as it turns out, it's more of an identity that's been passed from person to person throughout the years, created by an artifact known as the Grey Cowl of Nocturnal, that was stolen from the Daedric Prince Nocturnal by a thief named Emma Daraloth, who was the original Grey Fox. So the Daedric Prince of Night and Darkness cursed the cowl so that whomever wore it would be erased from history, so extensively that even those who knew the person prior to them donning the cowl would forget about them. Not so much the very concept of their existence, but certainly their identity, and thus the wearer becomes fully immersed in the persona of the Grey Fox. As per the curse, they become known by the cowl, and only the cowl. So the theory goes that one of Rune's parents at least is the Grey Fox, and the reason that nobody can discern the whereabouts, identities or fates of either of his parents is because of this curse. However, this theory does hit a frustrating wall. During the events of the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, we aid the Grey Fox in lifting the curse upon the cowl, revealing his identity to be that of Count Corvus Umbranox, returning his name to history, so to speak, and allowing the player to inherit the Grey Cowl of Nocturnal without becoming the curse's next victim. And though it retains identity concealing perks when you're donning it, it no longer erases the outside world's perception of the wearer's identity. Furthermore, Rune must have two parents. After all, it takes two to tango. There's only really one Grey Cowl of Nocturnal. I just find it hard to rationalise that even if the curse was still in full swing, it would be able to erase both parents from history. Even without scrutinising this further, clearly this is not the answer, unless Nocturnal reapplied the curse and Rune's parents take turns wearing it. So as interesting as that theory might be, it doesn't take much inspection, and admittedly I haven't done much, to prove that it's grasping at straws a bit. It's also unclear what happened to the Grey Cowl of Nocturnal after the events of Oblivion, and its very presence during the events of the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim hinges on how you view the canon aspect of the Creation Club, as there is a creation on there that does implement the Grey Cowl of Nocturnal into Skyrim with a quest that if anything would further disprove the theory surrounding Rune's true heritage and identity. Furthermore, the concept of Rune's parents erasing themselves from history, as interesting a statement as it is regardless, is made more so by the fact that Rune has joined the Thieves Guild. However, he was raised by a humble fisherman, and though he has learned to steal to survive, it was a chance encounter with Brynjolf that saw him join the guild in the end. So any connection to the Grey Fox prior that Rune might have is either a massive coincidence or is opening the topic up to a hugely complex metaphysical debate of fate, which in my experience doesn't lead to awfully satisfying answers. And though it probably isn't a wholly invalid train of thought, I simply don't have the lifespan necessary to fully understand it. And even if I did know the ins and outs of Destiny in the Elder Scrolls universe, the concept would then be applied to a theory that is still fairly vague in nature. Simply put, welcome back to square one, where we once again know absolutely nothing. There is no answer to who Rune's parents truly are. There is no answer to what his actual name is. There also isn't an answer to why he was found on a shipwreck north of Solitude with a stone upon which was a strange rune. Nor do we know why he has no recollection of his life before the shipwreck. He may very well have been too young to remember anyway, but the game never specifies that he was an infant, just a young boy. We don't even know what ship he was on. Could it have been the Orphan's Tear? There's nothing to suggest it. Or could it be a vessel we can't find in-game that now sits at the bottom of the Sea of Ghosts somewhere north of Solitude? All there is to actually know is Rune's efforts into discovering his own past have come up fruitless, and he's employed many great intellects to find out anything that they possibly can, with Athel Newbury as an example only coming back with the realization that whoever Rune's parents were, they must have actively erased themselves from history somehow, which doesn't strike me as an especially easy accomplishment. And we also don't know what information Athel Newbury has to come to that conclusion, as far as we can tell, Rune doesn't even know his birth name. There doesn't appear to be a start point for discerning much of anything. Now what really puzzles me is from the outside looking in, this doesn't appear to be a particularly important nor fascinating mystery. However, it's made interesting through framing. The game wants you to wonder, and then doesn't provide anything remotely resembling an entry point, and every piece of information leads to a dead end before any ideas can be formulated. And on top of that, theories such as the Grey Fox theory are, simply put, fairly straightforward to debunk. With that in mind, it does feel as if, in a way, this exists purely to frustrate. Perhaps there once was intended to be a greater mystery that we could follow regarding Rune's identity, but considering the apparent absence of any cut content suggesting it, that idea must have been canned fairly early. But there's also nothing to suggest that Rune doesn't exist as initially intended. Perhaps this enigma exists to the extent that was always planned. But why put emphasis on a mystery if there is no substance for us to actually explore? No information to dissect outside of the absence of information itself, and why highlight these dead ends as revelations? It's confusing and sends you round in circles. It's almost like I'm going insane, and at times I can't help but feel as if that's part of the point. Maybe, as a linear dialogue option would suggest, we aren't meant to know. But just like Rune, that doesn't quell our desire to. And perhaps that's the intended lesson. I know it's not a satisfying answer either, but I have a feeling this topic doesn't have any to offer to begin with. So to conclude today's video, before we all find our minds becoming jelly, which admittedly may or may not already be the case for me, it would appear the Thieves Guild in Riften is home to a rather strange, frustrating mystery to which there are really no answers to be found. It would seem we cannot help Rune discover anything about his mysterious past, nor can we seemingly run away with any theory without running into a brick wall before too long. Perhaps Rune is simply a nod to the 2000 action-adventure video game titled Rune, developed by Human Head Studios, that clearly served as a stylistic inspiration for the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. So maybe he just is but an Easter egg. But where's the fun in that? My thought process is, what if we've been looking at this entire mystery the wrong way? And by that I mean in assuming Rune's retelling of his backstory is an honest one. This isn't necessarily a hill I'd like to die on, mind, if at all avoidable, but there is evidence in the world of Skyrim to suggest that the Thieves Guild in recent memory has been infiltrated. There is a book that can be found in various places in the open world, including here in the Ragged Flagon Cistern, titled Fall from Glory, authored by a Nithillis Ladari. It's effectively a study on the Thieves Guild's rapid decline over the past few decades leading up to the events of the game, and the last couple of paragraphs that we can read as follows. In order to solve this mystery once and for all, I've spent the last 2 years infiltrating the Thieves Guild. Initially, making contact with them in Riften proved difficult, as they're wary of outsiders, but through repeated efforts I was able to gain their confidence. It's my hope that once I've gained access to some of the guild leadership, I can learn more about their decline and publish a second volume of my work. Although helping the guild perform their petty crime brands me as a criminal, I feel it's a burden worth bearing. And so we can gather the author of this book intends to unravel the mystery that is the decline of the Thieves Guild in Skyrim by infiltrating the Thieves Guild in Skyrim. This is the only book in the game written by this Nithillis Ladari, and it probably makes sense to A. not reveal your true identity to a criminal organisation when infiltrating a criminal organisation, and B. then when publishing your findings not to use your real name there either, using a separate alias in order for your cover to be maintained, while also keeping their true identity safe. As we know, the author intends to do more investigating and publish a second volume. This suggests this nosy scholar may still be actively involved with the guild under their alias, and though there are many generic members of the Thieves Guild that can be found in the open world of Skyrim stealing candlestick holders and mugs, it will make sense for one with such an agenda to spend as much time as possible in the guild's headquarters. And the game allows you to go out of your way to clarify that this character's backstory makes absolutely no sense. Furthermore, Rune is quite generic and does blend in with the furniture in the Ragged Flagon Cistern. He's quite good-natured, but he does claim to be a capable thief, and when we see him training we learn that he'd probably be quite useless in a fight, but that's probably more down to the game than any intention. But the only thing really connecting Rune to this possibly anonymous, if he's intelligent, author that goes by the alias Nithillis Ladari is the process of elimination. He's the only character whose backstory seems so unbelievably confusing that it's hard to believe, and perhaps you can make a case that it's a bit too out there to be made up, and this letter from Athel Newbury may be all the evidence we need to prove that. But it may also just be the elaboration of a cover story. But considering that he doesn't seem to be near a leadership position, he probably hasn't been around in the guild for a terribly long time. Maybe a couple of years, just like the author. Enough time to gain the trust of the guild and become part of the furniture, but not necessarily enough time to advance very far up the ranks unless you're the player character, in which case becoming the leader takes about an hour. As for why Rune would go for such an unhinged cover story that is his apparent background, Never underestimate your power to make friends when you have an interesting backstory, especially one where your parents erased themselves from history, not dissimilarly to the story of the Grey Fox, which is detailed in a letter that Rune just leaves haphazardly laying around, for some reason. Also, the stone he was supposedly found with, the one imbued with runes, isn't actually present on his person, and yet he implies that he's still in possession of it. What if it doesn't exist? It certainly feels like a more likely explanation than Rune just happening to be entirely enigmatic in origin, to the point where even the greatest minds of Tamriel cannot discern a single thing about anything about him. So why not? What if his entire story, his entire motivations for being present, are little more than a red herring? What if Rune is this undercover author simply wishing to understand the decline of the Thieves Guild? He's certainly young enough to be naive enough to think that's a clever idea to begin with, but smart enough to ensure that he conceals his identity both to the guild and to any who might read his published findings, and capable enough to concoct an elaborate cover story that makes your head hurt when you think about it for too long, while ingratiating himself with the guild becoming a part of the furniture. And while I'm unconvinced it was the intention for Rune to be perceived this way, it is the only avenue of theorising regarding him that doesn't give me a headache. That said, it's not a belief I'm committed to, it's just another possibility in the sea of what I'd imagine is many. But I've rambled nonsense for long enough. I'd like to know what you think about Rune. Where did he come from? What is his story? Is he possibly this undercover author, both infiltrating the guild and publishing his work under two separate pseudonyms? Or was he genuinely rescued from a shipwreck as a child, with no viable information to lead him to answers regarding his place and people of origin? Whatever your thought process is, feel free to exercise it in the comments section. Thank you all for watching. I really hope you've enjoyed this one. Be sure to go ahead, leave a like, subscribe, share the channel with your friends, all that wonderful stuff. It would be massively appreciated, only if you want to, of course. Maybe follow me on some social media as well, but again, the decision is completely up to you. And of course, be sure to let me know if you'd like to see me explore other topics. And with any luck, I'll be seeing you all very soon with another video at some point. But until next time, please, take care and goodbye.